E-Generation Challenge winners with us here today. Unfortunately, the third has fallen sick and he won't be joining us today. The 2021 and 2020 editions of the CDL E-Generation Challenge were combined due to COVID, and participants submitted their thoughts about the effects of deforestation and proposed possible solutions to curb the trend. Winners of the challenge went on a trip to visit the Jane Goodall Institute in Tanzania in 2022. They are Nitya Leila, a culinary anthropologist who has dedicated a decade to educating people of all ages on the importance of culturally diverse diets and quality farm-to-table artisanal produce, while preserving biodiversity and ensuring longevity of the planet's resources. We also have Esther An, an environmental and climate activist, as well as an undergraduate student studying environmental science and political science at NTU. Joining the panel after the presentation by the two winners, we have Dr. Andie Ang, President of Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, and the conversation will be moderated by CDL Chief Sustainability Officer, Esther An. Although Daryl is not here with us today, I will still introduce him. He is an illustrator and educator who works with museums and cultural institutions worldwide and encourages learning through the power of imagination and play. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nitya and Sean for a joint presentation.
Thank you everyone for joining us today on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. We're very sorry that Daryl couldn't join us. He's fallen under the weather because I think we really bonded over the 2 weeks that we spent in Tanzania. Like, all of us were at different stages of life and didn't really know what to expect when we got there. We didn't know each other before as well. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time together, and I think there'll be some pictures and sharings about it as we go on. So, yeah, what were your pre-trip expectations?
I feel like for Daryl and myself, like pre-trip we didn't have any expectations because we were very busy, like rushing to prepare everything.
Yeah.
Like to get taximeter and to get all the clothes and whatever we had ready. Because like I've never been to that part of like Africa before. Daryl hasn't been to Tanzania also, so we weren't very sure what to expect.
Yeah.
So pre-trip we didn't have much like things going on.
Because I remember we were, chatting, because I was, I think, in Europe at the time, and we were having these calls before the trip, trying to discuss like what we needed to do, all the things we needed to get, and we were trying to get things secondhand as much as possible, or finding things so we're not buying things new. And then I think a big question was whether we had to get malaria, like whether malaria was a concern, whether yellow fever was a concern, and how wild was it actually going to get as well, I think. So we really didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, so these are some pictures. I think on the right is a picture of, so we went to Dar es Salaam, which is one of the two main cities in Tanzania, and we were at the Pugu Nature Center, and so this was the view from the nature center where we resided for like most of the trip with the folks from Jane Goodall Institute Tanzania. And I think this is just a pretty sign that Daryl took a picture of around the nature center where we were staying.
I think also like because we saw a lot of these signs everywhere around Pugu Nature Reserve actually. So Pugu is one of the sites of the Jane Goodall Institute. The chimpanzees and stuff are at Gombe, which is
the other side of the country.
Yes, it's on another side. So I think we didn't realize, so I'd been to Africa before, but I think we didn't realize the scale, right? Like kind of when I think there was on the second day, on the day that I arrived, we were like, okay, we're going to go to this mangrove that's around the corner, and it was like a 2-hour drive or something.
More than that.
Yeah, more than that to Pemagazi mangrove. So that was our first activity. We landed. I came 2 days later. You guys had, okay, you can go first.
Yeah, Dara and I went, I think Nitya was still in Europe and she was on her way back transiting, so she joined us slightly later. So Dara and I actually arrived in Dar es Salaam first, and then for I think the 1.5 to 2 days that we were there before Nitya, we were just settling in, meeting the different volunteers from the Jane Goodall Institute Tanzania at the Pugani Nature Center. And then we were going around to some of the different primary and secondary schools. I think to set some context, when we were going over, we were meeting a lot of folks from that were running the program called Roots and Shoots. So Roots and Shoots for the Jane Goodall Institute is an environmental education program that started in Tanzania in 1991, 1990s. Yeah, anyway, it has since expanded into an international program. So I think there's also Roots and Shoots in Singapore in a couple of the schools here. But I think it might be the most widespread in Tanzania. So they have hundreds of schools from primary to secondary to like tertiary institutes like universities that all have this like program there. And so over there, it's run as like what we would refer to as like a co-curricular activity. So students join the Roots and Shoots clubs in their school, and then they take part in activities that have several different themes. So environmental, sustainability, or like wildlife conservation, or like humanitarian kind of involvement and like community projects. And so when we were over there, we were mostly following the team around that was in charge of the Roots and Shoots program. And so when Darren and I first arrived, we were going around to a few different schools in the area in Dar es Salaam to see what their Roots and Shoots clubs are like and what activities do they do, and to meet some of the teachers and the students that were involved in that program. And so we were doing that for a few days, and I think on the second day, in the evening, we drove over to another area that's outside of Dar es Salaam called Pembam Nazi, and we were driving over because the next day we would join a few schools of kids that were like taking a bus down to the mangrove site, and we were going to do some like mangrove reforestation with some of the villagers nearby that were involved and in charge of that project. So I think Nitya arrived the night that we reached Pembam Nazi.
Yes.
So that was the first time we met.
Yes, that was the first time we met, and I think it's also.
I think we have pictures. Oh, later on.
This is also a nice time to talk about. I think before, when we applied to take part in the E-Generation challenge, with CDL, I think we work in the teams. You work with environment conservation, activism, and I've been working from the realm of biodiversity through food, and it was an interest to see how like the Jane Goodall Institute is international, it's widespread, and it's very much about kind of working, decentralizing the conversation around conservation, and I wanted to see that in action, and how you can kind of create change and make for a better planet, and without it being too, it wasn't militant. It's very soft activism.
Yeah, it's very ground up.
It's very ground up. And I think for us, it was also like the 2 weeks, because we spent so much time with Roots and Shoots, it was also very much with the youth, right? Like a lot of, I think these guys were all, about 11 to 13.
Younger than that also.
Younger than that, yeah. And the volunteers were first-year university students to recent grads. Yeah. So it was really interesting. I think for East Africa, about 80% of the population, is below 30. So any kind of effect or change that you're going to make is going to happen with the youth, and that's what we kind of saw in action.
Yeah. So these are some pictures of when we were going around the schools. So this was, I think, the head teacher and some of the other teachers showing us around their school garden. And so at this school, they were involving the students with like gardening and like taking care of plants around the school as the activity to involve them in somehow environmental and sustainability activities. So I think what we saw was that the framework of like Roots and Shoots and environmental education was in every school, but how they chose to operationalize it and how they chose to bring it across to their students was very dependent on like what the school decided to focus on, what resources they had, how their physical environment was like. So at this school, they were focusing on creating a school garden. And so this was their garden. This was the kids. Behind is one of the volunteers. Actually, I think she was a university, she's an undergrad.
Yeah, she was doing field work.
Yeah, so she was doing field work. So she just joined us. Her name is Blantina, and then the head teacher is at the back. Yeah.
What did you see at the end? Because when Sean was leaving to go back to Singapore, And Blandina was like, oh, I want to come and visit Singapore and something like that. And we were just, I think we were playing around, and she said she's going to not friend you anymore. No.
She said cancel friendship.
Cancel friendship. At the end.
So this was the Pugu Tree Nursery. So at Pugu Nature Center, where occasionally they would, so I think it's in the middle of like a forest reserve, and so occasionally they host groups of students in the Roots and Shoots program to come over to take part in activities like taking care of the trees or doing like citizen science surveys around the area, and to just, it's like an environmental education, kind of like a boot camp, like an all-abound Singapore that we have here, but that's what they do over there. So at this center we were staying, and then there was this little tree nursery at the center also that they were taking care of these. They were growing from like seedlings to saplings, and then they would give out to the community around and to the schools around based on what their needs were. For example, if they wanted like more fruit trees and things like that.
So I brought back some seeds from the nursery. So there's something quite special called the Tanzanian orange, which is quite unique to that region, I think. So I took some seeds, and they also keep a lot of seeds of their kind of a lot of their native plants. And a lot of them have medicinal kind of uses or religious uses in ritual practices, but traditional plants that are disappearing, basically, with a lot of deforestation that's happening in the area. I think even to conserve, so with Pugu, the reason that it's still in the state that it's in is because it was in private hands and donated to the Jane Goodall Institute. But around there with the land that state owned, there is still some tension around deforestation and pushing for more conservation work in the region as well. So we were very lucky to see that slice. And so much of the the schools that we visited, I'm not sure if it's true for all the schools that Roots and Shoots works with, but they all had a gardening program. The ones that we visited, you know, they were and the really amazing thing about Tanzania is because they are on the same equatorial line as Malaysia and Singapore, a lot of plants that they were growing was very familiar to us. You know, they had curry leaves, they had a lot of coconut trees, different kind of peppers, I think even pandan leaves, right? They called it something else. So it was very familiar as well, the food. I think that was also a narrative that we really enjoyed.
You should talk about the food.
And Sean was a vegetarian.
Yeah. I still am.
Still vegetarian. But he was vegetarian in Tanzania, where it's still a relatively novel concept. So he was getting different. Like meat was, so they were using all different parts of the meat of an animal. So it wasn't just like, you know, focused on like the most prime cuts of meat. So in a way it was more sustainable, but I think there was also a conversation about eating less meat. You know, like it's the style of dining is very like your chai fan or your nasi padang style. You know, you have your carbs, and then you have a couple of vegetables, and then you have a protein. And that can be beef, chicken, fish, anything that's around, very fresh, and very little waste in the products. But sometimes I think in the first day that I arrived, I had a bit of fufu, which is a kind of fermented cassava that's cooked into like a polenta style thing. That was my main starch. And then there was beef, right? And then the next day at breakfast at the Mangrove, there was some leftover beef that was served for breakfast. And I think I remember thinking at that time, like, that's a lot of meat to be having in a row, you know. But it's still, I think, in the developing world, meat is still seen very much as a sign of prosperity and success, right? Being able to eat meat is still a luxury, and having access to it is, you don't waste it when you see it, I suppose. But what were your protein alternatives that was given?
I had a lot of beans. I think they're big on beans, so I had a lot of beans, a lot of greens, a lot of like spinach or...
Oh, eggs.
Yeah.
I saw you eating eggs like 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
But it was also kind of navigating those, like, you know, how do we eat, you know, what can we eat, and also not being the guests that are kind of bringing your ideas to a place and kind of asking the chef to cater to it, right? Like kind of being adaptable and flexible and really appreciating the local cuisine as well. was delicious.
Yeah, I think talking about expectations, I don't know, I don't think I had any expectations about food also, but it was like quite similar to the food that we have. So although we are like so far apart, but the food was actually very convergent on like, yeah, like what you said, is like cai fan or like nasi padang. Yeah, so it was very familiar. They have like pasta, rice, meat stews, stewed vegetables, beans. They have some breads that are like chapati.
Yes.
They have fried dough fritters like youtiao or yeah. So I thought it struck me how similar it would be, and I don't think we expected that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you go west or south, right, where the terrain is quite different, the cuisine also can change. But I think with Tanzania being coastal but also equatorial, you get a lot of, it's very lush. A lot of green vegetables, a lot of fruits, very tropical, basically. So the cuisine was very similar.
Yeah, I was very struck by how everything that we will be eating or consuming is like grown and produced in the country, which I think is very unimaginable coming from Singapore, because everything that we eat and produce is not, like mostly not from Singapore, it's all imported, but everything that we were eating there was grown somewhere in Tanzania and was made somewhere in Tanzania.
Within just like a very near kind of, radius of where we were staying. Like, I think imported food is still very much a luxury, right? So eating local was the kind of most nutritious and most affordable way to go. And I like, we didn't get any kind of, we weren't ill, we were eating everything that was local and around, sometimes street food as well. And very healthy bellies, the whole trip.
Yeah, so I guess we kind of went off on a few tangents, but anyway, this was another school that we visited, and at this school they were involving the kids with making some like, making these like planters and like these pots from concrete, and so then they were using these for like landscaping around the school. And then I'm not sure if we have a picture here. Okay, we don't have a picture here, but they were also using like old tires and like those mineral water bottles. They were like filling it up with stuff and also using it for landscaping around the school. And I think one thing that I remembered thinking was like in Singapore we also do that. We like try to upcycle old like plastic bottles into planters and what, but it's more of like a craft activity for us. But over there they really integrate it into like the backbone of like how they landscape the whole place, which was really different and interesting to see. This was us on the first day. So you notice that Nitya is not here because this is when we first arrived on the first day at Pugu Nature Center. So like the view a few slides ago was behind us, and then Daryl and myself and the other volunteers, so Frankie, Zulaiha, Modi, and Salum. Yeah, so they are some of the volunteers that were kind of from the Roots and Shoots program, and they were bringing us, they were kind of accompanying us and also bringing us throughout the days that we were staying there.
And I think because we were hanging out like 24/7 with local volunteers, right? I think we had an experience that you wouldn't have as a visitor. We heard their struggles and their experiences, their observations, their challenges, and also like everything else that Pugu had to offer. It was very immersive. We became friends basically at the end of it.
Yeah, and most of them were like students from the Roots and Shoots programs when they were students, and then now that they've graduated, they've come back to like be a part of helping to run more programs and to reach out to more schools. So for example, Moody, he was telling us how from primary school he was in Roots and Shoots in his primary school, and then he went up to secondary, and then he also continued it in university. So it was very interesting to see how there is like a whole vertical succession of being involved in Roots and Shoots as an environmental education concept that I guess we don't really have a parallel here.
And I think also the contrast was interesting because some of the things that we have as limitations, which is land, right, or nature for agriculture and all of that, which Tanzania has so much of. And then the things that we take for granted, which are considered luxuries, like computers, getting a job straight out of university, having that structure available. So I think it's also seeing how conservation, biodiversity, all of this also, it has to come hand in hand with like structural development where there are economic pathways, for the youth to get a job, but also being educated from a very young age about the importance of conservation, right? The work that the Roots and Shoots is doing in the schools, especially for me particularly, was with the girls in school. Keeping girls in school, I think felt very personal. Because I think the rate of girls dropping out after puberty, especially in the developing world, is incredibly high. And so the Roots and Shoots does a lot of programs.
So actually, like the logo at the top is the Jane Goodall Institute's logo, and then I think the four symbols there represent different things. So the first symbol represents Dr. Jane, and then the second is about one of their focuses, which is wildlife conservation. So it's represented by the chimpanzee because Dr. Jane worked with chimpanzees. And then the third is a leaf, which represents like environmental sustainability in general as a focus, separate from wildlife conservation. And then the fourth is about community and like humanitarian efforts. And so in Roots and Shoots, in their programs they involve, it's not just like an environmental club or like a green club, but it's a more holistic way of looking at environmental and sustainability by also bringing in the people aspect, the non-human other species aspects, and also environmental climate change things. And so I think one thing that I was very interested to see and to experience, and that I read up before going there. So I guess that was one of my pre-trip expectations and that we got to see going there was the intersectionality of the approach of Roots and Shoots. So how they, just in the logo and in what activities are involved within the program. So so environmental sustainability is not just environmental sustainability, and it's not just protecting green spaces, or it also expands to protecting people, ensuring that people have things like sanitation, reproductive health access, gender equality, people that are communities that have less get resources and supplies that they need. Yeah, so I thought that intersectionality was something that the environmental and kind of sustainability movement has been kind of gearing up and aligning towards in the past few years. And it's been something that's gaining traction, but this is something that they've been doing for decades really. And so from a young age, they learned that environmental sustainability is not separate from all these other things like society and people and reproductive health rights and all those other things. Yeah, and so like Saloom on the right, on the left, was sharing that for them, Roots and Shoots is not just the activities that the kids are involved with and like what are the outputs of whatever activities that they take part in, but it's also about imparting values to the kids and to the students that they can, even after leaving the programs, even after leaving school, that they can take with them throughout for the rest of their lives. So values about caring for the environment, caring for wildlife, caring for communities around them, and other demographics that, yeah, so like Saloom was sharing after university, I think you hadn't arrived yet, but we were talking with Saloom and like Moody one night, and he was sharing that during university or after that, he was working with a friend on another project I think it was about reproductive health outreach and providing like reproductive health supplies to people in the community in Zanzibar. And so yeah, that was an example of how as someone who has gone through the program, he has taken away values from the program that he will then go on to live with.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all the activities we saw and when we worked with any of the school kids, you know, it was very well gender balanced. Right? There was like 50-50 boys and girls taking part in the mangrove planting and any of the activities.
I'm skipping ahead to the pictures.
Yes, I think these ones. Yeah, we built our tent in the.
Yeah, the kids. Yeah.
So these were the mangrove saplings that we're planting, because I think I mean you're probably right in the middle of that to talk about it in terms of how important conserving our mangroves are for you know, to prevent soil erosion and all these other things that.
Yeah, so I guess like mangroves in general are an important ecosystem because they provide a lot of benefits to people and communities, and they bring us a lot of things that are important to us and protect the local communities and things that we care about. So I think people might term these like ecosystem services. So some of the benefits that mangroves bring include like reducing soil erosion. They provide like resources like timber and like food to people who are living nearby. When we are concerned about like storm surges and climate change and sea level rise, they attenuate like waves that come towards the land. They help to protect the land. It's like a natural, nature-based like coastal defense, and they sequester a lot of carbon, and so they bring a lot of benefits to people that are in the area. And so I guess this mangrove at Pembamnazi was an ecosystem that was once cleared by people who were using it for like timber and things. So you can see like all these white stumps of the mangroves. So those were once cleared, and then since then, with the Jane Goodall Institute coming in with Fruits and Shoots and with the local village nearby, they were taking charge of kind of doing reforestation and replanting the mangroves. Yeah. So this was the mangroves, and so these were the propagules. And so mangroves are like, I guess they have a special adaptation to live in like the harsh between land and between water environments that they live in. And so they generate these like extended seedlings, kind of called propagules. And so the villagers kind of harvested all these propagules that were ready to plant, and then we went around with the kids kind of sticking them into the mud and planting them in. Yeah, so you were saying.
I mean, for me, what was so interesting was, I think the whole process, we were there for what, 3-4 hours, right? In like the hot sun, it was raining and it was super hot, and the kids were like fully invested the whole 4 hours, and they were planting these saplings like non-stop, right? And excited about the process, you know. And I was like, I think we were just talking after, and we couldn't imagine that happening in Singapore, you know, and how do we create like that kind of enthusiasm, right? Their legs were covered in mud.
Yeah, the terrain was really difficult.
Yeah. And we had like this, you know, your feet get stuck each step you take, and and they were singing, they were planting, and it was just wonderful. And we just thought, how do we create that kind of where you're not afraid of nature, you are in harmony, and you are okay with a bit of sun and a bit of rain and a bit of dirt, and enjoy the process, you know? How do we create that kind of mental mindset shift in very sterile, protected environments, mega cities like Singapore as well?
Yeah, and the picture on the left is, like the kids were all scattered around in their own groups, and so each of them would like grab a bunch of propagules and go around sticking them into the mud, and so we were all kind of spread out over the area. And at some point I saw this kid. He looked like he was like primary 2 or 3 kind of age, and he was like squatting. I think he was taking a break, and so he took out this book to read, and I was like, oh, that's cool, can I take a look? And so in very like broken Swahili, and then I guess I gestured, and then he was kind enough to lend it to me. So this was the book that he was reading, and it's in Swahili, so I can't understand, but I can look at the pictures. So as I saw him reading that, and it was a handout by the Jane Goodall Institute, so it was a book about the different mangrove species, the different trees, and I guess I would suppose like an elaboration about their benefits and things like that. So that at that point, it also struck me how it was kind of similar to in Singapore. So how we run the 1 Million Trees program. So when Jane Goodall Institute brought these kids over to take part in this mangrove reforestation project, it was also an example of one of the activities that they run, of the very many that each school does to get kids connected to nature and to the environment. And so like in Singapore, if you join NParks on like a 1 million tree planting, you realize that the point is not to plant the trees. The point is to reach out to communities that are planting the trees, to tell them what are the native tree species, what are the benefits of trees, and what are the benefits of tree planting. And things like that, and to get them connected with native species, with nature. And so they would be, if you go to like a planting, they will be introducing to you what is the species of trees that you are planting, and some fun facts and things about that, and you can scan a QR code to learn more. And this was very much what they were doing also over there, right, with getting the kids involved in the reforestation project. But they were, the point was not just to plant the propagules, the point was also to teach the kids about the different species and to get them connected with them. So I thought I saw that parallel, and that was like really interesting for me.
It was like very immersive learning, I guess. Like the whole, everything that we saw was always, there was an element of like immersion. But the main kind of overarching theme was education.
Yeah.
That was, And we learned a lot in the process as well, I think.
Yeah, this was the campsite that we were at. So we arrived the night before, and we arrived the night before. We were walking through this very beautiful sunset to carry like all our supplies to the beach where we were camping overnight. And then later on, we were eating around the campfire, and this was the first time we met Nitya.
In the dark.
Yeah, in the dark. Couldn't see each other.
No, that was really hilarious because so everyone was doing even though everyone being Tanzanian is an overarching identity, everyone still had their tribes that they traced their roots back to. So, and each tribe has a skill set. It could be a dance, it could be a different kind of dance, it could be a song that they sing. So every volunteer was putting on a performance, and then they were like, can you guys show us what your tribe does? And I think the three of us were like, okay, what do we, I think we ended up singing Chan Mali Chan as our performance for the evening around the camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best we could do, I guess. That's our tribe.
Yeah.
I suppose. Yeah. And then we went to pitch tents basically in the middle of the night. It was pitch dark, and then it was really dark.
Yeah.
I think somehow we managed to do it, and they did it so fast. They were just like, and we were kind of just trying to figure out where everything goes. I think the next day, someone was telling me, basically Tanzania has snakes, right? Like poisonous snakes, like the mambas, and they're everywhere. But then I think someone was telling me that it's the black mambas you have to be scared of, and those are in the Congo, and the ones in Tanzania are the green mambas, and they're super lazy. If you don't disturb them, they will just leave you alone. But yeah, they're around. Don't worry about it. So that was quite fun as well. But we didn't see one the whole trip. I would have liked to see. Liked to see one.
Yeah, so this was the beach after we finished planting the mangoes and we came back. What do we have next? Oh, let me see if there are any pictures we didn't talk about. Oh, meeting Dr. Jane.
Yes, that's when she arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was her first trip to Tanzania in
post-COVID.
Yeah, like in 2 years, I think, 2-3 years. And so, I mean, the kids that were there were really excited to meet her.
So I guess the context was that Dr. Jane was coming over to Tanzania for the first time post-COVID, and she was going to Gombe, I think, in the end. But she made a pit stop at Dar es Salaam first to come by Pugu Nature Center. And so what they did was, when Dr. Jane came over, they invited groups of students from around the region, so like students from the Roots and Shoots program to come over and to like share with her what they were doing in their own schools and to hear from her. And they also had the volunteers sharing about their own experience in Roots and Shoots. So this was Frankie, so one of the volunteers that was following us around. So he was kind of sharing with the kids, sharing with Dr. Jane about what he did. Yeah, and
we had a tree planting. So she planted a tree at one of the saplings at Pugu, and then we planted one as well, which was it's still there and it's being watered, and it says Singapore team. We were the first visitors from Singapore to Pugu, so they didn't really know what to expect. And it was so funny when I landed. Moody, who greeted me at the airport, he's like, "You're African, you know?" And I was like, "I guess." He's like, "Yeah, I thought you're from Singapore, you know?" So that was really funny as well. And then we gave Dr. Jane, because something that they have in Tanzania is cassava chips. So it's very, very popular. And it just happened that I had brought some cassava chips from Singapore, which are the super thinly shaved ones, which are the Indo style. And they were comparing both. And we brought some snacks as well. This is a good time. We brought some snacks from Tanzania to share with you guys that you can try. So you've heard of the baobab tree. The tree that's like, it grows to 100 years old. It's huge. Even elephants go in there to find shelter sometimes. So the seed pods, they have it as a bit of a snack. The seed pods are like this, and it opens, and it's full of seeds, and it's coated in this like white kind of dry pulp, which it makes it into a snack that we feel is kind of like sour plum.
No, that's after they spice it.
After they spice it,
Yeah.
yes.
So they mix it with some sugars and some spices, and then it's kind of like a candy.
Yes.
And it comes from, I think it originated in Zanzibar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they fight about it.
Oh, all right.
Because Kenya has its version as well.
Okay.
So the whole coast
Okay.
kind of has a discussion about where it comes from, and
Okay.
they flavor it differently. The Kenyans believe theirs is much better, and you know, we also had a lot of discussions about who speaks Swahili better, right? The Tanzanians are like, the Kenyans don't know how to speak Swahili. The Kenyans are like, but the Swahili comes from Kenya. I mean, there's all these different discussions, and I think it happens with food as well. Just like how we fight with Malaysia about who invented laksa, I guess. Yeah. So we have it for you to try.
Yeah, it's called ubuyu, and it's over there. We have it. Yeah.
It stains your fingers and your mouth pink.
Yeah.
Right, because they add. So we'll bring it around later to share. And I also brought some cashews from Tanzania. So the crops that Tanzania is really famous for growing for export is also cashews and coffee. They don't drink a lot of coffee in Tanzania. Most of it's exported outside, so you find it in like your very hipster, third wave coffee places, you know, and chocolate as well. So we had a lot of interesting discussions about food. I think I brought some single origin Tanzanian chocolate to share with the team at Pugu, and they were like, "What is this medicine?" You know, because it
was very dark chocolate.
Yeah, it was very
It was
dark
not sweet at all, and
so
they were not
like,
a fan.
It's not Cadbury's, like it doesn't taste good. I was like, no, it's Tanzanian chocolate, guys.
And they're like, no, this is medicine.
Didn't go down very well. So, but that's what we gave Dr. Jane. We gave her some snacks from Singapore. We gave her some.
Yeah, so Nitya brought actually we brought a variety of food items. So Nitya and Daryl brought, I didn't bring anything. Yeah.
There was some
What do you
pandan
bring?
flavored stuff.
Yeah.
I brought the tapioca chips, and then I think we had some other crackers and nuts.
Yeah. Can you all guess what Daryl brought over? It's a very like Singaporean. No. He brought, sorry? No. He brought Irving's salted egg fish skin thing.
We also, something that was really popular was kaya. So we brought some kaya, and I also brought some pandan cookies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you brought sambal.
Yeah, and I brought sambal and things like that. So the sambal went down really well.
Tempeh chips.
Tempeh went down really well. Tempeh chips. Yeah. So and then kaya was really popular. Everyone loved kaya.
Yeah.
And we bought like those pandan egg wafers, you know, those love letters, and all that went down really well. The salted egg chips, not so. It was a complex relationship.
Yeah.
Although Salum said that he's thinking of opening up a franchise in Zanzibar because they have all the ingredients to make it.
Yeah.
Curry leaves and stuff. Yeah, the fish skin, salted egg fish skin.
Yeah, so after the different students were sharing, the volunteers were sharing, then Dr. Jane also went up to share about her own experiences. Yeah. And then after that we had a conversation with her. Yeah. Okay, going back to see if there are more photos to talk about. Okay, no.
We have, I have a video of Sean learning African dance from one of the volunteers, but he refused to put it up in the slide. We were on the beach in Zanzibar, and he was learning his moves. Yeah,
I do not remember.
I'll share it later with everyone. Oh, we have a video from
Yeah, so like you were saying just now how none of them had actually met anyone from Singapore before. They didn't have any Singaporean visitors before. Yeah, so we have a little clip from Salum. So he was in some of the earlier pictures. He was one of the volunteers that was following us around also. And I think it's just like 30 seconds of him sharing his thoughts. I'm not sure how to play it. Is this right? Okay, yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Salum from Zanzibar. Before I met my friend from Singapore, I only knew it is a highly developed country, to the point that some political leader was setting an example like, if you vote for me as president, I'll make Zanzibar to be like Singapore. When it comes to conservation and environmental education in East Africa, there's actually a hope. But the only thing I'm afraid of is some development projects that do not consider environmental sustainability programs. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Lee Kuan Yew is like super popular in East Africa, right? People running for government will quote Lee Kuan Yew's kind of policies and stuff like that, and be like, okay, you know, if you want to be like this country called Singapore, like vote for me, which was something that they'd heard of before. And also I think Zanzibar and Tanzania have a lot of expats or multi-generational kind of trade with India, with the Arab Peninsula, as well as with China. So they were familiar, but the idea of a country that's multicultural, where all of these different kind of races exist and build together. Because I think in the beginning they were like asking if you guys could communicate with some of the Chinese people we met in Tanzania.
Oh,
Remember?
yeah.
And Daryl is like, no, it's different, you know, like we're same but different, right? And kind of explaining what Singaporean culture is like, the multiculturalism, the multiracial society, was also quite interesting.
Yeah, so Salum is from Zanzibar, which is like this island off the mainland Tanzania. And yeah, so the two questions, in case you all didn't catch that, was what were your thoughts about Singapore before meeting us, and also what are your hopes for conservation in Africa? Yeah.
And he's the one that's working with the reproductive health in Zanzibar. Yes.
Oh, this is our tree that Nithya was talking about, our sapling. Yeah. And this is the front gate of like Pugu Nature Center. So, yeah, you can see the symbol, the logo of Jane Goodall Institute on the bottom left of the word Pugu. Yeah. Anyway, this was our home for the trip. Yeah. So, I think we were also thinking about what's next for from our trip.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that we're saying, like some of the things that we do take for granted, that we realized when we're in Pugu is not something you should, right? Like, which is electricity. A lot of the volunteers come to Pugu to charge their phones or charge their laptops, for example, if they have access. So we were really kind of, I think for us, next steps are to kind of create a more equitable exchange around conservation work, you know, kind of sharing more access. We want to send some technical equipment and outdoor equipment to Pugu in the next few months.
Yeah, I think before, like we were also saying before COVID, Pugu Nature Center was also kind of an area that people from all parts of the world would come to kind of join them in their work, to learn about how they run the programs there, and also to shadow them and do an internship and things like that. And so I think that was also something that they were hoping to kick off again with COVID kind of being more manageable now and travel kind of resuming.
That's true. So they get a lot of interns and volunteers coming in from Korea and Japan. But none so far from Singapore. So
and it's the first time they've met any people from Singapore. So I think that was something they were also interested to explore, whether we'll be interested in forming that kind of connection if Singaporean students or like young professionals will be interested in going over there for like a short stint to learn from them, join them in their work.
Yes, I think you can field research for 3 to 6 months, volunteer, and stay at Pugu. So what we experience over 2 weeks, you can have like an extended experience of. Yeah.
So I think we're also going to try and hope to forge that kind of connection between the two countries, since now we have that. And also they love roots and shoots. It's like, yeah, so they're also hoping we can continue to work on it in Singapore, in the region also.
We have Andie here later, who can share a bit more about Jane Goodall Institute in Singapore and also the roots and shoots in Singapore.
Yeah, so I think, yeah.
Thank you so much for that insightful sharing. Now may I please invite Esther and Andie to the front to join the panel, please.
Hello everyone. Yeah. Welcome to the Singapore Sustainability Academy. And can the back see us? Yeah. Okay, great. For those who are new to this academy, may I just spare a couple of minutes to introduce what is this academy about. And this was actually designed and built by CDL in 2017 and opened on the World Environment Day. And what you see here is very different from what these two young people share in Tanzania. In the very cosmopolitan city of Singapore, we are also looking at how we can conserve the energy. And this building was actually built to the highest level of Green Mark standard, and it has been powered by solar energy. What you see here is actually the energy that we produce solar panels. And since the opening, every year we actually rely on solar energy only, so that makes this building as a net zero building. So, well, I think for those who are first time here, if you have any program that you want to promote related to climate action or SDG, the 17 SDG goals, and do talk to us. And this is a rent-free space for people who want to promote good causes and also partnership. So, commercial is over. Yes, let's. Yes. Okay. So, wow, it's so excited about hearing your experience there, and so I would let you take a little break first, and now let's talk to why you were there was actually because of our E-Generation challenge, and just now you heard what they say is like they're probably the first batch of Singaporeans being there. So our CDL E-Generation challenge was actually aims to do that, is to bring our young champions to places that are not quite different from Singapore, or climate challenge places that that we can bring our young champions there, bring back what they learn, and inspire our young Singaporeans to do their their part to conserve the environment. And we're very happy to be partnering Jane Goodall Institute. In fact, in 2019, that was when we hosted Dr. Jane herself. Actually, just before COVID, we were so happy about it. And well, I think for the benefits of the audience, maybe I can actually ask Andie to talk a little bit about Jane Goodall Institute Singapore's vision and mission. But before that, you see, Andie is very young, and then but she's a doctor, and she has this nickname, and it was in the ad, right? The news article, and call you the monkey whisperer. So she really, have this, love for monkey, and you have a special way to communicate with them, right? So maybe you share with us your own little journey. How did you start, the love, with monkey, and how do you think it can really contribute to Singapore's aspiration to be a city in nature?
Thank you so much, Esther, and everyone at CDL, and thank you for sharing the journey. It was really interesting, and everyone for attending. Monkey whisperer. I tend to whisper when I'm in the forest, but I don't think I'm a monkey whisperer, to that credit. In terms of personal journey, some of you might know I actually had a pet monkey when I was a young kid. It's illegal, so please don't do that. I didn't know it was illegal. My relatives, they were actually sailors to Africa, and they brought back this monkey, a vervet monkey from South Africa. So then I had it for a pet for a few years, and then realized that it doesn't really look happy at home, chained up. That's when I actually contacted Louis Ng. So I think some of you know that he is the founder of ACRES, which is the animal rescue organization in Singapore. And after about 2 years of getting all the permits and donations, we managed to send my monkey back to Zambia for a rehabilitation kind of session. And then he was released into the wild. So I would say that that episode actually made an impact for me and for Louis and ACRES, because ACRES logo is the blue dancing monkey, and so actually that's the monkey. And then for me, I actually decided that instead of doing mathematics, because that was my passion, I found another passion, which is to follow monkeys. And so in NUS, I decided to change my major from engineering to biology with zero background in biology. So I didn't even know what's ATCG, DNA. And from then on, with a lot of people's help and my supervisor, we managed to push me through into anthropology. So you are also anthropologists, but I'm studying non-human primates. So from then on, continue to do conservation on primates in Singapore and the region. Your last question is about what I hope we can do for the conservation in Singapore and fulfilling city in nature. I would say that coexistence is very important, because I think at one point you mentioned that in Singapore, we have such constraints in terms of land and a lot of competing users when it comes to our land. So we come into contact with wild animals everywhere we go almost. It's really important that we find ways to coexist with them and make sure that they thrive in our city in nature. Yeah.
talking about, you know, how do we conserve the environment, and actually it's sadly that World Economic Forum, every year they conduct a global risk survey, and this year, once again, loss of biodiversity is one of the top risks. And well, I think everyone have read news about, you know, all the forest fire, the heat waves and all that. It doesn't do very good for our environment. So you have been volunteering for Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, and you took over the helm in 2018, right? So what exactly is your vision when you took over the leadership, and what do you, set for Jane Goodall Institutes to, to achieve for the environment and for Singapore?
The Jane Goodall Institute in Singapore was set up in 2007, so we are like 15, 16 years old now. Our vision is for people to live in harmony with nature. And from there, our programs are geared towards 3 aspects. I think, Sean, you mentioned as well with the logos of JGI. There is the people aspect, the communities. There's also the wild animals, the wildlife, and of course the habitats, the ecosystem. So with these 3 in mind, our programs are designed to inspire, educate, and activate individuals to make a difference. So, we believe in JGIS that individuals really play a role, whether it's in your daily life, at work, with your communities, in Singapore or outside. So for us, we hope that with our organization and within the network of volunteers, we can really make a change in terms of coexistence, nature, and the communities in Singapore.
I think during COVID, we all remember that, a lot of people actually, went out to the, nature reserve and all that. And even near my house, every time I went to, Lower Seletar Reservoir, always monkeys are given already. And actually, I saw a lot of wild boar. The whole family is like growing almost double. And I think, in our Singapore Botanic Garden or the river, the waterway, we always see otters as well. So when you say in harmony with nature, and a lot of people, some people complain that they were attacked by animals. So in your own opinion, I know you may not be whispering to all animals, but what is any tips that, how can people, Singaporean being a very urban type of, population, how can we really live in harmony with nature?
So I think a lot of people, it's not that they hate animals or, they are angry when there's conflicts that happen. Most of the time, it's only because they really don't know what to do when they encounter wildlife. And then from then on, there could be other consequences like, their food being snatched away, or when they run off from the animals, they fall down. And so when the reports come out, it seems like, there's a lot of animal attacks. So I would say that a first step really is to have a better understanding of our natural heritage, right? What do we have in Singapore? What can you encounter when you're out in nature areas, or even just outside your house, your building? We get to see wildlife almost everywhere, I would say. And then after understanding what we have, it will be good if you can take a step further to know the do's and don'ts when you encounter wildlife. Very simple things like not to feed animals or not to get too close to them. We have a lot of materials out there. I think social media, websites, everywhere you see, even advisories from NParks. If you learn a little bit of some of the tips of what to do when you encounter wildlife, your encounters with them can be from negative to even neutral or positive. So I think from then on, we can start to talk more about conservation. Then what's next if you're interested to learn more about biodiversity and how to help them?
Great. Maybe I will give you a little short break, and maybe back to Nidya. I mean, since I know you will survive in any forest, any jungle. And she finds food in almost everything, Yes, you are. I always envy her. She knows everything about that is edible. And we feature her like in one of the edible green event as well. So how do you find peace and harmony with, nature, whether it is the biodiversity or even the trees and plants and all?
So, I mean, what Andie was saying, I thought was quite interesting as well, because I think wildlife is also kind of adapted to live with us, right? I see our wildfowl sometimes standing at the traffic light. Yeah, to cross the road, near Botanic Gardens or even in Chinatown. And I had an encounter with a wild boar recently. recently when I was walking in Pulau Ubin and I was looking at a pineapple, and suddenly the wild boar pushed through because it was also looking for the pineapple for breakfast, you know. So I think it's also, they are so used to us. So I think it's about how we kind of respect these shared spaces. In terms of, for me, like biodiversity, what you mentioned with the World Economic Forum's latest report, biodiversity conservation doesn't happen in isolation. You know, there's all these other things that are happening around it which are going to really stress this. You know, the cost of living, the very, I think they are projecting a super low rate of growth for the next 10 years. And the people who are most affected by climate change and biodiversity loss, it's also the people who are below the poverty line, as we would term it, right? So for me, when it comes to food or, you know, looking for your wild plants, for us in Singapore, you know, it can be considered a luxury, right? Like, you have the time, you have the knowledge, you can go out, you can forage, you know, you learn about your, as you said, your natural heritage via the food that you eat. But in places like Tanzania, where we're in, your native plants and which are around you, the knowledge about that, having access to it, growing it, is your food source. You know, and when the weather, when the climate increases, the temperature increases, when there's deforestation and access to this changes, people's diets suffer. And that's the kind of basic thing that happens. So that's why for me, I always encourage, you know, make your plate as diverse as possible. You know, don't just have chicken and broccoli, but try and eat things which are more local. Try and grow local plants when you can. Instead of trying to grow tomatoes, grow something that's quite hard to kill. You know, grow laksa leaves, grow Thai basil, you know, share with your neighbors. So for me, I really believe conservation happens at home. It happens in your day-to-day, you eat 3 meals a day. You know, make it a sustainable choice. And the impact that it has in a developed country is quite different from what it has in a developing country, but it can be widespread.
Sean, I saw some of your picture. We didn't get to see you dancing, you know, but we saw you really making friends with the locals there in Tanzania.
He was the best Swahili speaker out of the 3 of us.
We have a video also of like our trip, like a video montage. Maybe we can show that later.
Okay, maybe. Yeah, so from your experience, because you have been an activist for a while, right? So how do you compare, like, you know, mingling with the Singaporean, you know, youth, you know, to talk to them about environmental conservation, about the planet and all that? Do they really appreciate that from your experience? And have there been any changes, you know, over the last few years? Yeah?
Yeah, I think maybe I've only gotten into the space in the last few years also. So, but I think sustainability, like climate change and climate action, these are all things that are kind of picking up steam in the last few years. But I think for the layperson, some of these topics might still not be, might still be kind of far away, might still be kind of intimidating to learn about from scratch. And I mean, I'm very fortunate to be studying that in university, so it's obviously much easier for me than for other people. But I think people are starting to understand that these are important things that we need to be thinking about, and these are things that there's no longer much debate about, so we have to be learning more and seeing what we can do. I think we need to be going beyond some of the very basic sustainability narratives like recycling or things like that. I think what people can do most actually is to not to do any action per se, but to be learning more about these different topics. And so, like Andie was saying, the first thing you can do for like wildlife conservation is to be learning about what wildlife is out there. And then the next thing is you can be learning about how you should be how you should be interacting with wildlife or should not be interacting with wildlife. So I think, like for myself, if I think what is the first thing like a youth or any person can do for like climate action or for environmental action, is not to do any action per se, but it's to learn about the different issues that are out there before you find your own. before you find the thing that you're most interested in, the thing where you can contribute the most, and then it's only after having like that understanding that you can start to think further about like, okay, so what as an individual can I do to contribute to like the cause, to contribute to the movement? Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. I think, you know, only through awareness you can drive action. And well, a lot of people, we all grew up in the city. So a lot of kids, it's like when you ask them where you know, does chicken come from, they will all say NTUC. So I think this is something very real. And I think in order to really change the mindset and change, you know, to give them the knowledge that, you know, there are wildlife outside. And in fact, in Singapore, we are very lucky to have very rich biodiversity, whether it is, you know, in the forest or actually in the ocean. So if for those who are interested in marine life, please visit the Singapore Botanic Garden, the CDL Green Gallery. We have an exhibition going on, and we also learn by doing it, and we really have very blessed with very rich marine lives in Singapore. And go and take a look, and then hopefully you can also join them to help to protect the ocean, you know, lives as well. Okay, so now back to you, Andie. It is really not easy to be an NGO in Singapore, especially when you talk about going green and all that. So for my own journey, I started in the 1990s, which is like everybody is looking at you like blank. It's like, why you want to go green, why green building and all that. But over the last few years, like what Sean said, that suddenly sustainability become mainstream, because everybody have learned that the health of our planet, people, and the businesses are all interconnected and interdependent. So, Andie, so do you see that this is now the good time for you to step up, you know, after COVID, or we can come out in person, and any big plan for Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, and how do you think you can expand your outreach to Singaporean that can actually appreciate the so-called SG Green Plan that, you know, aspires to be, you know, a city in nature?
Yes, so like you said, right, being an NGO in Singapore is really not easy. We definitely are looking for funds and sponsors, you know, like potentially with CDL. Just saying. Yes, we have been long-term partners. Yeah, so for JGIS, we, like I mentioned earlier, about coexistence is very important. And also now that we are managing COVID pandemic quite okay, we are looking into expanding our eco walks into this ecotherapy program. We want to combine nature and mental wellness. I think in your first or second photo, there was one on this signboard that says nature is the best cure, or like therapy. Yeah, so since 2010, JGIS has been providing nature walks, like guided nature walks to the general public. Exactly. So we have been providing nature walks to the general public in order to raise awareness about nature and appreciation. But we felt like, you know, over the years, it's a good thing that there are more and more walks available for the general public. But then we realized that, you know, these walks might not be generally available to the underserved communities. And we wanted to maybe fill this space or gap by bringing the underserved communities out to nature, to enjoy nature, and to also improve their mental wellness and physical wellness. So just last month, we got a small grant from the Health Promotion Board in order to do this partnership. So we're now identifying different partners, the different institutions, in order to prepare our nature guides and bring those communities out to nature to really enjoy. So I would say that for the big plan in JGIS for the next couple of years will be on ecotherapy.
That would be great, because Singapore is also a fast aging population. So I think, well, like they say, nature itself is the best physician. So we want to prevent, you know, to fall sick or become too weak to walk and all. And I think we should also take care of retirees and to help them stay physically and mentally healthy and fulfilling as well. So I think definitely we will be, you know, happy to continue. And talking about partnership, yeah, what are the challenges and what do you think we can do better in terms of public, private, and people partnership in Singapore?
I think for this kind of partnerships, now that we are seeing, sustainability being a big topic, everybody really wanted to ride a wave. But, you have different organizations, different institutions or individuals, they have different, I would say, interpretation of sustainability. It's one word, but it has a lot of meaning in different sectors, right? Whether it's public, private, or people. And so for us, the challenge would come in where we are trying to align each other's objectives. I think ultimately we want something good out of this partnership. But sometimes, if we're talking about the biodiversity space or, the business space, it seems like the people are different, speaking different languages, even though we are trying to achieve a common goal. So I think it's really important that when we come into discussions for partnerships, we try to come from the other person's point of view as well. Maybe I'm trying to push for certain biodiversity concept or conservation, but the others are trying to come in terms of like sales, how do they actually benefit from there with our partnership. But then, if we don't understand where they're coming from, it's hard to actually form that long-term collaboration. So for us, I would say that my experience is that we need to first, put ourselves into the other person's shoes or their organizations to understand what are their mission and vision, and then what they hope to achieve, so that we can come to like a middle ground in order to achieve our goals.
Find alignment. And of course, Sean, I was about to ask you already, being a young activist, how do you want to, write on this, the public-private people partnership to amplify, action and also impact?
Actually, yeah, I was thinking, because you were mentioning that, I was thinking about the different, I think one example of a very successful, or very positive experience of a people public-private partnership was, I think, in recent years, there are a lot of developments in Singapore, and the approach towards development, I think, has shifted a bit over the past few years. And so, with a lot more focus and interest in nature and green spaces, the approach towards that from all three sectors has changed a lot. So I think, and please jump in if I'm misrepresenting something, but I think in recent years with developmental projects, both the NGO space and the developers and also the governments, they are coming together a lot more to be thinking about issues that affect all of them with the development. So, for example, whenever they run new developments now, it has kind of been built into the pipeline that when authorities or developers are working in more sensitive areas, they start talks with nature groups and NGOs very early to kind of suss out what are some of the potential issue areas and what are some of the mitigation measures that they can start to talk about and think about. And so I think that has been one example of a very positive development in this 3P space. And I think one example is also the Cross Island Line development in recent years. I think that has been many years in the making, and I haven't been personally involved in the process, but I've heard people who are talk about it, like Andie. Yeah, so I think when I heard from other people that when these three sectors first came together, everyone was quite apprehensive, everyone was quite tentative about how interacting with the different sides would go. But then over time, it became a really positive thing. People were learning from each other, people were listening to each other and seeing what they could do, trying to stand in the other shoes, to understand for example, from FTA's perspective, trying to stand in the nature group shoes to understand where they're coming from and things like that. And that has grown into quite a positive partnership. And I think one example, a few years ago before COVID, Andie was also here in this same space sharing about an update about the Cross Island Line developments project, and I was somewhere in the audience. And so this space was also provided by CDL. So I think that's a really positive example of that. Yeah, and I think recently with Louis Ang also that you mentioned just now, in the past few years, the National Day Parade Committee from the Singapore Armed Forces has also been looking into this 3P partnership. So in their planning process for NDPs, they've been coming in very early to bring in green groups into the conversation and bring in corporate sponsors into the conversation to see how they can make NDPs more sustainable and more green. And this year, they also did it here, in this same space. Yeah, so I think these are examples of really positive 3P collaborations. And so your question was about how youth groups or youth activists can also write on this. Yeah, so I think I was talking about land use and land developments in Singapore. I think youth groups and youth activists and environmental activists have been a very integral part of this process also. So I think one of the organizations leading the charge on this, thinking about land use issues and how we can reconcile our different needs and the different priorities that we have in Singapore is Lepak in SG, which is a youth environmental group. I think they just celebrated their 7th-year birthday anniversary. Yeah, so they've been one of the groups that have been engaging with the government a lot on this, with developers also. And so now, whenever there are developments, they are one of the first people to come to the table to kind of share their thoughts and give suggestions. And so, and another example of this was, I'm in NTU, so in NTU we have an environmental group called Earthling NTU, and recently there is a development with the Choa Chu Kang PUB Waterworks, which is just outside NTU in the Western Catchment. So Western Catchment is one of the largest secondary forest patches we have in Singapore. And so PUB also, when they are thinking about this, I think they put up like a public consultation, but they also decided to reach out to Earthling, which is our youth student environmental group, to have a conversation with us about what are some of our concerns and what are some of the things we can do together to, in terms of like outreach about human-wildlife coexistence, because I think these things come to the fore when there are developmental pressures and there are more human-wildlife interfaces, and then there's more risk for conflict, but also there are more opportunities for coexistence. So yeah, I think these are some examples of how youth groups can come into
definitely,
the
I think, well, through conversation, they will improve understanding and also collaboration. And well, we're very happy that we have, you know, with this very humble space, it is supported by 6 government agencies and also more than 100 partners, you know. So I think many groups have been using this space to promote their causes. And I think everyone is changing and learning. I still remember when we completed one of our condominium called Tree House, Dairy Farm Road, and that was 2017, and it has actually the world's largest green wall. And you thought, yeah, it must be beautiful, everybody loves it, and the fact was not. Some of the residents say, oh, I hate all these creepy crawlies, you know, come into my house and all that, I don't like green, you know. So, but today it's very different. After a few years, they do appreciate greenery much better, especially after COVID. And well, last year I went back there for, you know, some BBC filming. They almost rolled out the red carpets to welcome us. So it's like, people are all changing. So we need to change together and appreciate, you know, greenery better. And in our own, you know, humble interaction, in fact, in the audience, there are quite a number of, you know, young champions. And, you know, we have Stephanie, who is actually Green is the New Black founder. Also, you know, look at behavior of consumers. You know, everybody is learning and changing, but I would say that the last couple of years, sustainability is really exploded into the mainstream. In fact, every government agency is also setting up, you know, sustainability team. And we have a National Chief Sustainability Officer also. And I think even MINDEF has a Sustainability Advisory Committee. And while I don't know why I was there, but, you know, I just give, you know, my 2 cents worth of how do we engage the NS boy, you know, that 2 years captive audience. That is the time to really, you know, shape them into an ambassador. When they're after 2 years, they come out to school, to continue university or working, you know, they can be our green champions. Yeah, so I'm mindful of the time, and I'm sorry that I haven't, you know, offered you guys, you know, a chance to ask questions. Are there any questions that you would like to ask our panelists here? Ah, okay, I see a hand there. Oh, you do? Yeah.
Thanks so much for your question. I think for your second question, I might need to defer to Esther for more advice on this. But for NGOs, at least for us, we won't actually involve in that process. So back to your first question, In terms of land space in Singapore, if you look at the URA master plan that we have, it seems like every area has been designated, for their land use purposes, but they're actually subjected to change. So, to my understanding, sometimes, protected areas might have a different use in the future if there are competing needs for it. Of course, most of the time it won't change that much. But there are also other areas where at the moment it seems like it's reserved for residential use, could still be retained for wildlife conservation or protection purposes if there is a need for it. Or for example, like, the public might have more voices to say that this area is really important for us. We need to maybe put it aside for other purposes besides residential use. It could still change, but all these things require a lot more voices. And then in terms of the biodiversity conservation, for me, I think one thing that's really urgent is that in some of the areas currently, if I say it now, it's very important. So, a lot of the spaces in Singapore might be under different ministries, and a large space of the greenery is under MINDEF. And those areas, I think you mentioned Western Catchment and things like that, those actually have a lot of biodiversity left because, people cannot enter, so they're being left alone. But that also means that researchers have no access to that space as well most of the time. And so, it might be very difficult to obtain sufficient data on what we actually have left in those areas. So I would like to urge for more conversations with researchers or other, individuals with the ministries that could we actually have access to understand what's there? Because sometimes when, this area is being changed to some other development use and then environmental impact assessment might then come in, it could be a bit too late because by then there might be some needs like, oh, I need 10,000 units of houses there. I can set aside maybe 2% of the land left for maybe a green park or something like that. And then maybe the assessment say, oh, it's really high in value for biodiversity, but there might be very little we can do at that point. I'm not saying that we should all go into the forest and then find out what we have and then, declare everything has a space to be protected, but it would be good to form a baseline on what we have. And then from then on, enter the conversation of the land use for different areas. So I think that's what I would say.
Can I give a shout out?
Yes,
I think like you were talking about the different areas in Singapore, and I think if you're interested in that, Lepak and SG, the group that I was talking about just now, they've put together a Wild Spaces report and also like a website that they highlight some of the critical green spaces in Singapore that might be subject to future development and what is interesting about some of these areas, what is the biodiversity available there. So I think that's a great place to start if you want to take a look at some of these areas. And also Lepak and SG with Singapore Youth Voices for Biodiversity, which is another youth group focusing on biodiversity conservation. They have started and they are still running nature walks to bring people into some of these areas. So I think previously they did it at Holland Plains to bring some of the public folks into these areas to show people what nature and what biodiversity we have left at these areas and to understand the places better. So if y'all are still interested, you can always look them up on social media.
Okay, I just got a time check sign at the back. Yeah, so maybe what we can do is just wrap up with one last thought. We all have interacted with Dr. Jane Goodall, the legendary Jane Goodall. She is now, this year should be about 87 years old, right?
88 this year.
88 years old. And she is really my idol, and, tireless efforts to really protect the forest, and also she's called the, chimpanzee lady, and, for 6 decades now, right, if I'm not mistaken.
She was 26. She went into Tanzania.
So 6 decades now. So we have the honors to actually, work with Jane Goodall Institute to host her, and have hosted a fundraising dinner, and also at the NUS Culture Center, it was a full house lecture that, Dr. Jane gave this, really inspiring thoughts. And I think Lydia was actually the MC, right? So I think this is also a good partnership. But I have my own thoughts after I'm, interacted with her personally. I want to hear the three of you. What did you get, the impression or inspiration after your interaction, with Dr. Jane? And let's start with you first, Lydia.
I just want to say something very quickly based on what Andie and you yourself shared, Esther, with MINDEF, right? I think we have like 1% of our land dedicated for farmland, and recently quite a few of our farms was handed over to MINDEF. And I hope the next time you meet MINDEF, maybe you can encourage the NS men to become edible farmers, edible garden farmers. I think they could grow some of our produce for our 30 by 30 goal.
Yes, we have 30 by 30
and they have a lot of land as well. So that's just a little quip, now that you guys are in there.
Okay.
But I think for me with Dr. Jane Goodall was, the thing that always stood out was she uses the tools of storytelling, of comedy, like there's laughter, the stories are funny, they are heartwarming, and it's very human. The method of communication is human, it's gentle, it's accessible. And for me, what has always stood out about Dr. Jane Goodall and also about the work she does with the Institute is the decentralization of conservation work. The ethos is the same, but it's a ground up, kind of a groundswell happening in all these different communities led by local leaders and volunteers who know the land, who know what's needed, who are interacting on a day-to-day basis. So I think if anything that I took away from it was that it doesn't have to be, all trendy words and dynamic slang and big top-down things. It can be egalitarian, it can be equitable, the 3 Ps, they can level the playing field, hopefully, for everyone.
Wonderful. Marilyn, can you call up the slide also? And now, Sean, what is your impression after you interacted with Dr. Jane?
Yeah, I think when I first saw Dr. Jane in person, my first thought was how, like, when I was a kid in primary school, I had this comic book with all these, like, amazing people, like Marie Curie and, like, Florence Nightingale, and, like, Jane Goodall was one of them, and now I was seeing her in person, so that was something that was very incredible to me. And I think as an environmental science student, and I'm doing some ecology research now, and so to see her having gone into, like, the field of environmental and conservation work at such a young age, at a time where she was, like, facing a lot of, like, headwinds and challenges, I think I also am very interested and believe a lot in, like, diversity and inclusion issues. So just seeing her go through all that, but still be able to make such a big impact so many years on, and continue to be such a steward for conservation and sustainability and the environment has been just inspirational for me, and I guess she's just one of the people that I role model after.
Wonderful. Andie, you have the fortune to work with her. What's your thoughts?
When I first met her, she was drinking whiskey, and she said, I need that, do my conservation. But actually, Itia, when you mentioned about storytelling, that was something that stood out for me as well. Because we all have different views, and so rather than trying to say that you're wrong, I'm right, or change other people's views, we should tell stories. We should tell them about, what's happening, rather than, telling them what they should do. They will have to decide what to do. And another thing that stood out for me when I interact with Dr. Jane is that she's always hopeful. Even though, she traveled all over the world, she's seeing so many different things that, most of the time it could be negative as well, but she remained hopeful, and so I thought that if she can do it, I can do it too. Yeah, so I think that's what I want to say.
Wonderful. This morning I have a very serious, group discussion about sustainability. One tech guy, young man, I think maybe 25, 26 years old, then he was holding this view that is like, I think it's a bit too late and too little we can do now. I'm like, come on, young man, So one thing that after I met Dr. Jane personally, one word that has stuck with me is the word hope. You can see that. That's the book that I actually purchased during the fundraising dinner. It's not the value of the book, it's the words that she gave to me that, always follow your heart and there's always hope. Yeah? And she has seen the world over the last 88 years, and never too late, never too little. The young people here in front, and these two ladies was with me at the COP27, and there are always challenges. And this young lady is going to Antarctica with me in a week's time. So we are all going to, learn the challenges the world is facing, and we also want to bring back hope. Whether we are in the business sector, public sector, or private sector, or people sector, there is always hope. Yeah? Okay, with this, and thank you very much for your time and for your, for so attentive, and they were so quiet, right? They're listening to us. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Before we end, can we invite everybody to take a group photo, please?